Hi, I'm Sandeep, and you are watching the Indian Weekender. Today, we are in conversation with Immigration Minister Honorable Kris Faafoi to understand what more policy changes or relief or announcement we can expect from him in the remaining term of this government, which would be probably around 1 month, if I am correct, for the benefit of the vast majority of migrants who are experiencing significant disruptions in the last couple of years, and especially after COVID 19 has hit upon us. So, yeah, and what we also want to know is that if there are not any more announcement, then what exactly Labour Party is promising for the elections and for the next government. But before I invite Minister and speak to him and get to understand, I would like to acknowledge to all those people who have actually taken time out of their busy lives and I would say disturbed lives to write to us, connect with us, sending their stories on messages on Facebook and on our emails, opening their heart, sharing their stories of desperation, destitution, and separation. We acknowledge you sharing your stories with us. Although it would be very hard for us to refer to each one of you and raise issues with Minister individually, but we do assure you that we will be raising the issues that is affecting to all of you. So on that note, can I please invite Honorable Minister to our virtual studio. Welcome to our studio, Minister. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Sandeep. Very good. It's good to be here and acknowledge everyone that might be watching online.
Sure. So, Minister, I will be straight away starting with an important thing that have been relayed directly by a lot of temporary migrants who are stuck overseas to categorically relay their sense of gratitude after you have come out with the much awaited first policy, which can potentially let in probably around 850 temporary work visa holders into the country after October. So they send their gratitude, but they also send that this is definitely not enough and a lot more needs to be done. So, on that note, can I just ask you that would Immigration New Zealand or your ministry know the accurate number of the people who are actually stuck overseas and would have been ordinarily resident in New Zealand?
It could be anywhere in the thousands, Sandeep. So, what it's about at the moment is obviously trying to manage a number of things. Obviously, for humanitarian reasons, being able to let people back who have been normally resident, who have made New Zealand their home to some degree, if they've been here for at least a couple of years, or in some circumstances, 1 year. The other thing that we've got to manage, obviously, with COVID-19 is managed isolation and capacity for that. At any one time, I think there's about 7,000 places available in managed isolation. Obviously, the priority is being given to New Zealand citizens or residents who might want to come back. But obviously, with the borders being shut for some time now, there are some people who had made New Zealand their home, may have bought a property or certainly had work here or a job here. And as you say, 850 that we've allowed at this stage. And it is really, as you would have seen, some strict criteria around there. But again, what we've done is we've started, and as you say, there's probably going to be more demand, and we're going to watch that very closely just to see whether or not any more moves are needed there to accommodate those people who I think for at least the last couple of years have called New Zealand home.
Sure. Well, Minister, is it the beginning of this much promised and anticipated sequenced entry of different categories of people who were stuck overseas due to COVID restrictions?
I think in the last week you probably would have seen a flurry of announcements around partnership visas for waiver countries, the likes of those who are normally resident, some extension recently of visas for people who are here in New Zealand. Obviously, it's difficult to bring more people through to New Zealand, but we do have obviously critical exception and exemption regime there for some workers whose skills we might need, but the bar is very high. So we are trying to make sure that we're matching labour shortages, critical labour shortages, and humanitarian issues as well, with people who would normally be in New Zealand but are stuck on the wrong side of the border. So we're getting through some of those, but again, it's about managing isolation facilities and also demand on the likes of the immigration processing as well. So, look, Sandeep, I will fully acknowledge it's been a difficult 6 or 7 months for a lot of communities, especially the likes of the Indian community. But we're trying everything that we can possibly to either get New Zealand citizens from your community home through the repatriation flights. But obviously, there's some difficulties if people are offshore with visas that at this stage don't meet the exemption or the exception criteria that are in place because the border is closed.
Well, yes, Minister, I think probably you have quite well said, and that is oft repeatedly said as well. So, no problem
Mm.
there. Probably all temporary migrants who are stuck overseas, they get those kind of messages very clearly. But what they fail to understand is a lack of clarity from the government. Say, you said that probably we are facing a pressure on our MIQ facilities, which is being initially catering to our citizens and residents. But most of the time, those temporary migrants, when they are checking on MBI website, they are seeing that probably like even today, they were probably around out of total 7,000 capacities, probably 2,000 were not taken. So that's what they are hearing and seeing time and again. And that's when actually they really get frustrated that probably there is not enough coordination going on. Like we are having those around about 1 to 2,000 of capacities sitting vacantly, not being taken up. And on the other hand, we have got thousands of temporary migrant workers who have a life over here and who are even willing to share the cost of their quarantine and willing to come back, but they are not being offered any help.
Yes, Sandeep, but that's a really good question, but it's also a very difficult issue to manage. We obviously have to prioritise New Zealanders who want to come home, and quite literally, if a New Zealand citizen is somewhere offshore and wants to come home, we have to have capacity for them. We can't deny them entry. So we're going through the stages of probably getting a better booking system for our MIQ. So some of those peaks and flows that you talk of, where we do have some capacity, don't happen so much. I think once we have that in place, we'll certainly have a better way to manage the likes of some of the people who are on partnership visas who are normally resident. Then, as you will know, because of the difficulty of getting flights to New Zealand, it's a matter of coordinating that with flights or connecting flights as well. So, look, we fully understand that it's been difficult. There's no playbook for this. It's been a very interesting experience trying to get people home who are entitled to come to New Zealand. But that's why we've, have done things like extend the term for people who might have residence visas, for example, who have expired. We're trying to make sure that where there is a case to try and give people assistance, there is.
Sure,
But
sure.
again, 2,000 spaces, as you say, might be available today, but they could all be gone next week, and that's one of the issues that we're working really closely with Megan Woods, who's in charge of our managed isolation facilities.
Sure, no, I get that. It's a complex task. But the thing is, the people who have lost their visas and who are losing it probably every day or every month without any assurances, what they are seeking from government is a clear plan. So, would you be able to share or throw some light on the pipeline, on actually how you are planning to work on different categories of temporary visa holders? Like, what's your plan for, say, open work visa holders? What's your plan for partnership work visa holders? And similarly, we have got different categories of open work visas. So, have you put a time frame or have you given any directions to Immigration New Zealand to work in a manner when you can actually get them safely into the country?
Look, that all depends. Look, the starting point is all about managed isolation. And as I say, at the moment, it's 14,000 spaces per month. And a bulk of those are taken up by returning New Zealand citizens or others who have either by partnership or by exemption or exception
So, would you be
who are
would you
able
be
to come
able
here.
to would you be able to revive or extend the visas of people? I said temporary work visa holders who are waiting till we get our act together. Would you be able to extend their
Look,
visas?
we have done that for some categories, like residents, but the issue there that we're also trying to manage Sundeep is we've got people who New Zealanders here in New Zealand who may be laid off soon, and
Well,
we need to
that's the
prioritise.
point. Well, that's the point,
Yeah,
Minister. I appreciate you have taken that step last week, where you have
yeah.
extended visas of those residents. But again, in that case, they were primarily not based in New Zealand. They were offshore. They always applied from outside. They are always welcome. But again, they were not ordinary residents. So probably when we are raising the issue for those migrants who have been in the country on different temporary visa for say 6 to 7 years or maybe 8 years in some cases. They're expecting some compassionate action and humanitarian support from government. So would you be able to extend their visas by the time they wait that we get our MIQ facilities sorted to get them into the country?
Look, I can't. I don't think I can give you this kind of certainty that they're looking for Sandeep, because we're constantly reviewing the settings on a whole range of visas. What we do have to again also prioritise when we're looking at, let's say, for instance, allowing a cohort of temporary work visas into New Zealand or back into New Zealand, that we fully expect there to be an unemployment problem here in New Zealand, and
So is
there
it
is a
fair to
responsibility.
So is it fair to say that the major barrier of letting those temporary work visa holders back into the country is not logistical, it is more ideological? Is it fair to say that?
No, that's one of the factors that we're trying to manage here. It's, it is logistical. It is about us managing our economy here too, with us expecting, unemployment to increase. One of the factors that we've got to balance up and weigh up when we're making a lot of these decisions about letting people back into New Zealand, or into New Zealand who are going to be on work visas, is this skill or is this capacity available already in New Zealand? And when we do expect the economic tail of COVID to hit at some stage, and for unemployment to grow, when we're sitting around a table with colleagues about managing workflows and labour force needs, we're constantly saying to communities and also to sectors or employers, we must make sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that we can deal with some of these labour force issues from those who are already in New Zealand. That's why we're looking at the settings for visa holders for who might have work visas here in New Zealand, who can't necessarily get home as well. We've done that recently, and whether it be the RSE scheme, or we're looking at things like the working holiday visa scheme. um, the border is shut for a good reason, because we need to keep our community safe. And in the instances where we do think that skills can come back in, obviously, also, of course, with New Zealanders, we will bring people back, and they do managed isolation. But in amongst the many factors that you say are logistical, but also economic as well, to make sure that if a New Zealander who is here, who is made unemployed, can do a job, that we try and make sure that they are prioritised in amongst all of that. And we have
No,
to be
no,
really steadfast about that
surely.
because of the economic impact that we have.
Surely, Minister, from what I have been told and from what I've been relayed, nobody doubts on that. We do acknowledge that the government is dealing with an unprecedented situation, and you have got something very serious to manage the economic crisis as well. But the million dollar question that is coming back again and again on compassionate ground is that are you and your government willing to manage that economic crisis at the cost of individuals and people? We are talking about temporary migrants and work visa holders who should have been in the country, who have been left out of the country for no fault of their own. And now, today, do you mean to say you want to solve this economic crisis by giving up on them? Now, do you think it's the right thing to do that?
No, they're yours. They're your words, Sandeep, not mine. So what I'm saying is that we have to manage all of those different factors. As you would have seen in the last week, as I mentioned earlier, there's been a flurry of announcements in order to let some of those who are normally resident on humanitarian grounds, those partners of New Zealanders who are from visa waiver countries, who wouldn't automatically be able to come into New Zealand. We're slowly working our way through the humanitarian issues and making sure that we have enough capacity to take them. Is there an economic argument as well as a humanitarian argument to be able to let these people come back into New Zealand through the system? But most importantly, is in a health sense what we're doing the right thing to do. It wasn't an easy decision to close the borders to the degree that we did back in February. That's the easy part. The hard part is opening them back up in a way that keeps us safe, but also, as you would have seen in our policy announcement, lets us build back better and open our borders in a way that I think puts New Zealand in a humanitarian sense and in an economic sense in a much better place going forward, because we all need the economic response and recovery
Sure,
to be one that
sure.
benefits all New Zealanders.
Now, definitely, Minister, and I will repeat myself that we certainly acknowledge that you are dealing with a difficult crisis. And I also acknowledge that you have come up with some ameliorative policies and announcement last week, which is definitely welcome as well. That has been acknowledged by other temporary migrant workers who are stuck overseas. But like as always in the life, with every decision, more than the hope it creates more confusion and
Yeah.
resentment and frustration. So just like in the case of allowing partners of Kiwi citizens and residents, probably you have given freedom, you have given leverage to visa waiver countries. Now, what happens to the people actually, Kiwis, citizens, and residents who have got their partners from non-visa waiver countries? They are saying that probably that's not
Yeah.
the right thing to do that.
So I've got some good news for you, Sandeep. So that issue was raised with officials earlier today. So I can say with confidence that the processing of partnership visas for non-visa waiver countries will begin again this week. So that will happen on Wednesday, is my understanding. So while we were able to make that announcement for visa waiver countries, I think late last week, I know that there would have been a whole lot of people sitting out there asking what about non-visa waiver countries. So I can tell you that Immigration New Zealand will start processing those visas again, or processing those applications from Wednesday this week. So hopefully that's a bit of good news that
Definitely,
I know.
definitely.
Yeah, I know it's always difficult, as you say, when you deal with one issue, another one arises. But I think a bit of hopefully that news that process will start up again soon will
No,
be good
great.
news to some of those watching.
No, thank you very much, Minister, for telling us, coming up with this good news. Probably, I'm pretty sure all of our viewers and audiences who have been frustrated by not getting any clear announcement, probably they would be relieved of that. So, thank you very much. So, since you have started the list, can I ask you the other announcement that you have planned, maybe about post-study work visa and open work visas? Have you got something for them as well?
No, not at this stage. Of course, as much as we make decisions, I think, as I said, we're very careful and deliberate about what we're doing with others. So, look, I think also, and I think your community might acknowledge this too. It can be confusing. So, a rush of activity in terms of announcements can sometimes, again, raise expectations or dash hopes. So that's why we're slowly trying to work our way through this
Well,
systematically.
that's a very good explanation you have given, Minister. I don't think I've come across any better explanation than that. So full marks to that, I would say. But the challenge is,
Okay.
but the challenge is of what these migrants who are stuck overseas, what makes them anxious is that you, as immigration minister, have been given some exceptional powers by that Immigration COVID-19 Response Act that was passed in May, and based on which you were finally able to take that corrective action last week. So well done to that. But the
Yeah.
thing is that those powers were given to you as immigration minister just for 12 months. And if for the reason that you have mentioned that you want to stagger your decision making pace, which does seem right, but the challenge is on the other side that we are losing on time. We have already lost 6 months, and probably if there are no more announcements for say another 2 months since when the next government will be in place somewhere around mid-November, we would have lost 8 months, and then probably we have just got another 4 months. So at some stage, don't you think that Minister of Immigration will have to act with a lot of alacrity, speed, and come up with some kind of announcement to bring those, to offer some relief to those people who are stuck overseas before your
Uh,
powers are lost?
Look, I think when things are safe to do and when we've got capacity, then we'll do it. And I think that my first point is the most important point. The border is closed because, of course, we don't want uh, continued community transmission of COVID-19. And to this date, I think we can all pat ourselves on the back for the ability to be as close to normal as we possibly can be. So again, Sandeep, it is about a number of factors. So you mentioned the powers that were given to the Minister of Immigration. They are sweeping and they are time limited. But as with all sweeping and major powers, you have to use them extremely wisely and go through a process. And the process is about timing and slowly opening up. other possibilities for visa holders, whether they be inside or outside of New Zealand, over time when it's safe, and when we have capacity, to make sure we do get New Zealand back into a place where we're stronger. And what is driving that is a lot of the economic argument, and as you would have seen in the party policy announced last week, making sure that we do have a percentage of the MIQ put aside for foreign nationals who are coming back on exemptions and exceptions, and importantly, making sure we're encouraging investment into New Zealand. And a lot of that kind of big investment can come from the countries such as India, who we obviously have one of our strongest partners in the South Asian part of the country, part of the world.
Sure, sure. Definitely, Minister. We will talk more about that in a bit later. But I've got one last question about this whole COVID situation before we move on and talk about general immigration issues plaguing probably the last 3 years of term of this government. So the question is,
Yeah.
although we get that, like you have said repeatedly on many occasions as well, that you are having a holistic view on managing the border to keep COVID-19 away from our communities. That is quite important. And nobody's doubting that. But don't you think that that mindset and that approach has actually uh, gripped Immigration New Zealand into a siege mentality? What we are seeing is that probably the whole immigration department is working in a very reactive manner with no plan, with no plan for the future. How? So what I'm trying to say is that Immigration New Zealand, like right now, all overseas offices are closed. We are our onshore offices. I don't know in what capacities they are working. So it's a kind of a siege mentality. We don't think as a government we are working with a plan for the future to handle the demand and supply of migrants. So what exactly are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think if you're talking about overseas capacity, Sandeep, we've got Beijing out, we've got Mumbai out, so a lot of the processing capacity of immigration just simply isn't there at the moment. That's obviously to keep their staff safe in overseas ports
Surely.
as
So
well.
can we
So
not
I
shift that
think,
processing? Yeah, can we not shift that processing or pending applications to onshore offices of Immigration New Zealand, say for immigration
yeah,
of partnership-based visas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as we speak, we're going through what we might be able to do to bring some of that capacity of processing back on shore, Sundeep. We haven't finalised that yet, but I think this has been one of those issues where you can find yourself a little bit vulnerable if a lot of the processing capacity is not here in New Zealand. So we're going through that process at the moment.
Well,
I guess
well,
the other
I'm
thing is that they do feel like there's under a siege mentality all the time, but when you close the borders, obviously that makes things a little bit more tricky. But look, it is my job to defend them to a degree. I think um, they've got a pretty difficult situation that we've asked of them, to be fair, to manage a closed border. Again, closed for a reason, but I think as you've seen in the last 2 or 3 months, as we've become more comfortable and things have been more settled and managed isolation, and in the COVID situation here in New Zealand, we have been able to start looking at some of these cohorts where it's been difficult, and there are some humanitarian cases to either get people back in the country because this is their home for the last 2 or 3 years, or to reunify families as well. I
sure.
acknowledge the hurt that has caused some families, but it's not as simple as booking a flight anymore, obviously.
Obviously, no, I get that. And probably for the first part of your answer, I would consider is a very good answer when you say you are willing and looking into shifting those processing capabilities back onshore. That can bring some relief to a lot of. A lot of applicants who are in the queue. It will be a very good answer, Minister, if you can put some kind of time frame. Can you give me a time frame today when you will be able to shift those capabilities onshore?
Look, we'd like it to happen as soon as possible, but just can't obviously let staff go in some areas. And so we've got to think these things through about what kind of processing gets done where, and what kind of processing do we want to bring back to New Zealand. So again, I can't because we haven't made final decisions, but we certainly are looking at what processing can be done here in New Zealand, because obviously the situation in some of these overseas offices is difficult. So we're looking at it, and when we get closer to being able to make announcements, then we'll be able to talk about that a bit more freely.
Sure, and I'm hoping that you will be coming up with few more announcements before we actually go into elections, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think one of the issues that, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily pertinent to the Indian community, is the workforce that is already here, and things like RSE workers. So the sectors here in New Zealand that have traditionally relied on migrant workforce are finding things pretty difficult. Only half the migrant workforce that is usually here in New Zealand. So we've got to find a way to try and get as many people working for them. One of the things around that might be terms and conditions and pay to attract some New Zealanders and those who are here in New Zealand to work for this. So we're going through these issues on a regular basis, but it is obviously a challenge when the border is closed.
Sure, no, we get that, and I'm not sure if you will be able to answer it straight away or not. But once after you have looked after those RSE work visa holders for our farming and dairy sector, and you have also taken care of our New Zealanders, citizens and residents who might be keen to go and pick up those jobs, would you be willing to consider applications of a lot of people who are here on open work visa and who might have lost their jobs in last couple of months? Would you be able to give any concession to them to basically change their visa conditions and go and work with the different new employers in the farms?
We've done some stuff in that area. We've I think some temporary work visa holders, we've recently extended their visas by 5 months. For some, for another smaller cohort who probably want to go home and have found it difficult, we've extended their visas by a couple of months again. If we were able to make sure we maxed out the local workforce, and that's still a challenge working with some of these sectors. And then again, if there was a shortfall in some of the labour, I think we'd need to look at again who was in New Zealand and who could help us fill some of those labour gaps, if of course the border itself is closed. So, look, some of these primary sector industries that are traditionally relied on migrant workforce are finding things very difficult. We're asking them to go away and be a lot more creative about how they find workers at the moment. As I say, we usually have about 14,000 RSC workers in New Zealand at any one time when things are busy. It's down to about half, and some of those will prefer to go home because they've been stranded here for some time. So the big question, obviously, there is where are they going to find that labour? And we have showed some flexibility in visas in some areas, and we're working through on a daily and weekly basis about others who might be here in New Zealand who might be able to help in that respect too. So again, I can't give you precise certainty, but we're looking at how we can use the labour force that's here in New Zealand much more flexibly to make sure that the traditional work that we want to get done, we don't want these things going rotten on the vines or anything like that, can get done by people who are here. So if we get to that
Sure.
stage where we've done everything for New Zealanders, then I think we're certainly open to some flexibility as we've shown already in the last couple of weeks.
Sure, Minister, we'll wait for those announcements. Now, let's move on and talk about some of the disruptions, or rather, I say pre COVID immigration disruptions that migrants have been facing. I'm not sure if you have got the time since you have taken up this role to get a clear understanding about the scope of the challenges. In some cases, probably there are thousands of applicants who are waiting in the queue of skilled migrant categories. So, basically, have you got a chance to look into those kind of disruptions that people have been experiencing in last 2 years in the skilled migrant category? Can you offer something or some corrective actions in the near future for them?
Look, I think to answer your last question first, Sandeep, it's difficult with such less capacity at the moment with processing to be able to do everything that we usually do. So certainly the two issues that I was made aware of that were very niggly were processing times for the likes of SMCs, and the other one was around traditional marriages from people from countries like India. So I think probably just before COVID, in terms of processing times, we were just getting close to getting things back to normal, and obviously things had to come to a screeching halt. But obviously, with culturally arranged marriages, I think my predecessor made some statements that the settings weren't right and were put right. Now, the difficulty with that, Sandeep, and I think we should acknowledge that, is when you add the COVID layer onto that, it makes it extremely hard to be able to do some of the things like come to New Zealand and regularise a partnership if your partner isn't able to get on shore. So, look, these are the kind of humanitarian issues that I think you're probably close to asking me a question about, which we are aware of. But I think once we have some more clarity about COVID itself and our ability to manage things and quarantine, we'll certainly be able to deal with. But it's those kinds of issues are logistically, I think, humanitarianly, I think we were well on the path to making sure that the settings were right. But when you close the border, it obviously makes that pretty tough to be able to follow through.
No, sure, Minister. I think you are giving us some hope when you are talking about taking on the humanitarian grounds. Well, you have pointed about the partnership visas. We are aware that there are hundreds and hundreds, probably, of partnership visas who were granted general visitor visa based on partnership just before the onset of COVID. And since our borders locked, now their visas have expired. So they are hoping for some humanitarian announcement from your office soon. I'm not sure if you can promise that today. That would you be allowing them soon into the country? Have you got any announcement for them today, Minister?
Look, I can't give them that assurance today, but I think if they can watch what we've been doing in the last couple of weeks or a couple of months, we are certainly trying to make our way through some of those humanitarian issues. It's not an easy decision to which ones to prioritise. Obviously, those who are normally resident, we wanted to make sure that if they had a home here and had a community here, that they were able to come back as soon as possible. But I hope from seeing those kinds of decisions made that they know that we are trying to work our way through some of the humanitarian issues, as it was with some of the issues with partners from visa waiver countries last week. We've had parents who weren't able to come to New Zealand as well. So please know that it's while I know there's frustration there, and people might be getting obviously upset that there is no decision about this now. We're wary of the issues because of the advocacy of the community that are coming through from the likes of my colleagues, predominantly in Auckland, about where some of these pain points are, especially for the likes of the Indian community.
Sure. No, thanks for that. And I will leave it for our viewers and readers to understand what does it mean when you will be coming up with those corrective policy announcements. But I think we have a little bit meandered from pre-COVID disruption to again talking about COVID, which is definitely our topmost priority. I do
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
But the thing is, today, a lot of people, they have written to us trying to point out that the disruptions that they have been facing while dealing with immigration in New Zealand has not been just after the start of the COVID. They are experiencing disruption probably in last 2.5 years. And what they're trying to say is that I'm not sure it's for you to defend or refute the allegation that government's response in the last 2.5 years to a lot of immigration issues has been quite discriminatory. The way the government has acted upon is probably they are creating a lot of preferential list. So if you are looking into skilled migrant category, there is a priority list. If you are looking into partnership visa categories who can get into the country, we have again got a list. If we are looking into essential skills work visa, now this government has created again low skill, low median wages. So don't you think we are creating too many layers which are kind of discriminatory in nature?
Look, I think you always have to have criteria around visas, Sandeep. So a line has to be drawn somewhere. Look, I will take on the criticism around wait times and things like that. And my predecessor, as I've mentioned, put in place some measures to try and get things done faster. But it is never easy drawing up criteria for what kinds of skills or who wants to come into the country. And I think certainly this government has tried to take measures when there's issues which a community thinks are egregious, and the best one that I can think of, I've already mentioned, around culturally arranged marriages. But again, I think we've tried to make sure that as a country we're getting the right kind of skills match coming into the country, and we're trying to make sure that we have a high wage economy, not a low wage economy. And then you might have seen some of that come through our policy that was released late last week in terms of attracting a type of investment into New Zealand that hopefully can put us in a good stead. But for the last couple of years, we have been trying to make sure um, that the immigration settings are there to make sure that we're looking after people who are already here, and prioritising the kinds of people that are coming into New Zealand that can make the contribution that we need. But I think that's made even more greater challenge by COVID. Um, Not wanting to go back to the previous issue, of course.
Sure, no, I get that, Minister, and probably we'll talk about that a little bit later when we are going to talk about your election promises. But one more thing, probably one more category where actually probably the actions of this government were widely resented within Kiwi Indian community and other ethnic migrant community. That was the decision of changing the salary threshold to be able to sponsor their parents under the parent category visa. So at that time, probably there was huge resentment within a lot of communities as salary threshold were raised, I would say exceptionally high, which were kind of disenfranchised a lot of migrants to be able to bring their parents and do care for them. So at that time, we were promised by the former immigration minister and also on some occasion by Honorable Prime Minister as well that come election time, they will be coming up with their Labour's own parent visa policy. So are you ready with any parent visa policy for the future?
Look, I'm not here to announce that today, Sandeep, unfortunately. But again, that's one of the things that I was made aware of pretty early on in my short tenure so far as Minister of Immigration. I think the officials were looking at that issue when it was announced because of the amount of pushback that we got. But I'm sorry I don't have that announcement for you today.
But before elections, you will
But
be
there's
coming up with
obviously
the policy.
something that's got to be looked at.
No, I'm just
Look,
reminding
if we
you.
get the chance to, I will.
Sure, sure. Well, that is a very important
Oh,
thing,
it's a
I think.
reminder. Okay,
Yes,
rightio.
yes. I'm saying that you won't believe that a lot of people they have written to us, reminding us. I have got some names as well, probably which I am not going to announce. But a lot of people they have reminded me of the dates when former immigration minister and our prime minister has promised that they will be coming up with a parent category policy, particularly before elections. So that's why I'm requesting you that. Or rather, I'm inquiring you that when exactly you will be ready with that policy.
Well, thanks for the reminder. We'll give you a warning when it's done.
Great. So thank you very much for that, Minister. Now coming to elections, you have been time and again sharing your vision how exactly you want to uh, run the immigration settings if you are re-elected in the government. So in that scenario, basically, what exactly you are envisaging? What kind of immigration patterns would you like to forecast? Do you envisage there will be a lot of movement of people, a lot of ordinarily or medium skilled migrants would be able to come in and work into the country?
Look, I think we're certainly after highly skilled migrants post COVID, and we can't ignore the effect that COVID has had. But if we're bringing highly skilled migrants into New Zealand who not only contribute to their workplaces and their communities, but can fit in well with diverse culture. And I think that's certainly one of the areas where the Indian community has contributed to New Zealand culture and communities. That's really important. I think you probably saw late last week too um, that we're going to review the criteria in order to bring a broader range of workers here into New Zealand, but also attract a new kind of investment into New Zealand as well. So we really have to chase some of the bigger companies who might be willing to invest capitally here in New Zealand and also employ New Zealanders. But again, if they're wanting to bring some of their senior staff or highly skilled staff into New Zealand, then that's one thing that we're certainly going to prioritise as a government in the next term. Look, the best example that I can give that I've had pretty close interaction with is a company that everyone will know called Microsoft. I think they're looking at bringing the likes of a data center here, and the kind of investment they'll bring, the kind of staff that they'll bring, and the continued investment here in New Zealand is the kind of thing that I think we need to encourage. So I think certainly we're looking for high value type of immigration settings
Sure.
at one
No.
end, but obviously mindful that people still have to work in jobs as well that a lot of sectors are going to find difficult to fill, and if we can, we will.
No, sure, I get that, Minister, and I think probably everyone understand that there is no issues with that. But the challenge is probably your government's emphasis on getting highly, I would say, exceptionally highly skilled workers into the country. Does it translate into a contempt towards, say, ordinarily skilled, or maybe what this government has categorized as low skilled or below median wages paid skilled? Do you think that is now accentuating as a contempt towards those kind of low skilled work visa holders?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. So deep, and I think as I just said, we have to attract a new kind of investment. That doesn't mean we stop all other kinds of immigration settings. We're always mindful that if there are places or if there are skills gaps here in New Zealand, then we've always relied on immigration to fill some of those. It's just that we've got to be sure that we're getting the settings right. But economically, when we look at immigration in the future, that if we want to get a real boomerang effect here with the economy, it is high value immigration and investment that will be encouraging and seeking as a country. So we get those investments here in New Zealand. So I wouldn't see it as an or, I would see it as an and. Because there are still sectors that would do nuts and bolts work that have has continued to happen in New Zealand, where migrant labour has filled the gap. But again, we're not in normal settings, so doing everything we can to prioritise New Zealanders in work or those who are already here is important. If we can attract high value investment here in New Zealand, we will, because we think we need it to keep people in work and our economy ticking over. And I wouldn't categorise it in the way that has been described, because I think it's always an and, not an or.
Sure, get that. Probably that would be some sign of relief for a lot of people who are hearing out. But that takes me to another question: that would we be, as a country, we be able to honor those visa holders who were technically supposed to be in the country and they are being locked out for no fault of theirs? So, would you be able to give them any assurances that they will at least be allowed to come back in case government decide not to extend their visa, but still they will be allowed to come back and solve their finances, take their belongings before they have to say goodbye to the country?
Look, there is the ability for people to use. Look, let me answer that last question first, Sandeep. It's difficult to obviously get in the country for a good reason. If people have affairs that they need to clean up here in New Zealand, because they were set up here on the wrong side of the border, there is the ability to use agents, and we'd prefer that happen, because otherwise people might be using up precious MIQ facilities that should be used up. So we're asking people, if they're offshore and they do have personal issues to sort out, or to wind up their lives in New Zealand, that they use an agent or use family or contacts. To answer your first question, it really is how long is a piece of string, and that is what the wider border settings are at. And I think I've answered this question a little earlier in the first part of the show. Um, but we can't guarantee anything while the border settings are what they are. We're slowly working our way through some of these issues where there are humanitarian cases, but with the economy in the way that it is, and very fragile, when it comes to work visas and people who may be offshore, we have to make sure that we prioritise New Zealanders there first, and also look at flexibility for those people who are here in New Zealand already. So, as I say, we've been
Sure.
able to manage some flexibility with the visas onshore, but we really are managing health, MIQ, and also the economy at the same time.
Sure, Minister. No, we do understand that, especially while sitting here in New Zealand, we completely understand where you're coming from, what you're trying to do as a government. But let me relay you the experiences of a lot of temporary migrants who are stuck overseas. What they are seeing is that probably 4 or 5 years ago, they made a decision to have a life in New Zealand. They invested heaps of money, probably $30,000 to $40,000, to pursue their international education. They have been in the country for 2 years on student visas, then probably 2 3 years on different work visas. They were visiting back to their families when they were caught offshore, probably unguarded. And after the initial 3 4 months of the broader lockdown that we have seen worldwide, what they are seeing and experiencing is that probably other Western country or say immigration based countries like say Canada or maybe UK, they are allowing those temporary migrants into their country, barring New Zealand. So don't you think that's not a right to think their problem is that they are re-questioning and revisiting their decision of investing in money and also emotionally of making a life in New Zealand. Don't you think it's going to affect our global reputation for attracting probably say international students in coming years?
Look, New Zealand makes its own decisions as to when it opens up its borders. So while we watch what other countries are doing very closely, everyone's border settings are different, and New Zealand has made its call at the moment for where they are. And as you know, because of what has been announced in the last couple of weeks, we're constantly reviewing that and willing to make changes where that allows. At the moment, the border settings are what they are, and I understand the frustrations that whether it be the Indian community or any other communities who have got issues with where the border settings are. But and I acknowledge that it's been a difficult time, but it's been a difficult time for the country as a whole, and the overriding factor here is the border is closed for health reasons. And we are constantly looking at the settings there. And as again, I don't want to labour the point. If there is some flexibility and the capacity to do that, then we will always try and do what we can. But we are very limited in our options when we've got 7,000 MIQ places a fortnight and a situation where COVID is getting worse, not better overseas. So and I think everyone watching this in New Zealand will understand that we appreciate the health situation that we're in, even though I think we'd all prefer we could fast forward and be at level 1 next Monday. But you know, it's an interesting mix of things that we have to manage, and at the moment, we think that we've got the settings right.
Sure, Minister, get that. And when you say interesting mix of thing, I must acknowledge you coming out and having this transparent discussion with us, and also sharing the good news for partnership visa holders, as you promised that partnership visa holders of non-visa waiver countries, their applications would be starting to be processed for probably coming Wednesday. That's a good news. And I
Mm.
also take your promises. I would say that you say that you are continuing to work for different other categories, and you have assured us. I'm not saying promise, but you have assured us that you will be coming again with some. Corrective actions, some affirmative actions on that sense as well. And so I will really appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. And before I let you go, would you have any other assurance that you want to give us to those migrants who are facing disruption because of COVID? Any other announcement that you can come up, probably say in next couple of weeks before elections?
Oh, look, Sandeep, I won't make announcements here before I liaise with colleagues. But I think what I would reiterate the message that I gave earlier is please watch some of the actions that we've taken in the last couple of months. They have been based on humanitarian grounds. We have been listening to some of the issues that families, individuals, and groups have been facing because of the border closures. And as I say, systematically trying to work through those when capacity allows. We understand the pain and the frustration that some of these excuse me, some of these settings may be having for families, but we do ask for continued patience. The settings are the settings because we're wanting to keep the communities here in New Zealand safe. And as I say, we've we've been able to make decisions like the non-visa waiver processing for partners because we've known that they're on the horizon and that issues like that should be dealt with if they can. But that's only when it's good and safe and we have the capacity to do that. So acknowledge the community here and abroad for their continued support and patience. We've been able to bring back, I think, over 3,000 citizens and residents from India over the last couple of months, and that's the largest number from any one country. So I think while there are some difficult situations that people are in, I think the way that our communities and our governments have been working very closely together as well to bring people who do call New Zealand home and citizens back to New Zealand. There's certainly lots of stories where people who weren't too sure that if they would get home this year are now able to be with loved ones, even if it is after 2 weeks of isolation. But that is the world that we live in now, and I guess we appreciate the patience there because we know it hasn't been easy.
Sure, I think that is a high point to end our conversation. That is offering some hope to a lot of people. I definitely acknowledge that probably we haven't been able to get all the answers that we wanted from Minister, but Minister has been kind that the issue was raised to him and he has kindly announced one, affirmative action for those category. So in that hope, probably Minister, I will have to let you go, and it would be good if we can speak to you again, maybe before elections, and get to understand a little bit more about the promise of parent category visa policy that I have reminded you today. We would like to have the discussion again, if possible, before elections. And I would like to thank you today for taking your time and having this elaborate and transparent conversation. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Sandeep. Appreciate the time.